Hey there, I'm Christopher Schoenwald, and welcome to Life as a show intently focused on helping people find their professional pathway by exploring and unearthing the details of jobs from around the world. You know, I've gotta say that after 60 or 70 hours of in depth career conversations on various jobs with various professionals here on Life as most professions tend to lean quite heavily into one particular area or topic of interest that most would associate with the profession. For example, when I'm chatting with, say, a doctor, the conversation is naturally tilted towards matters relating to health and well being issues. If I'm speaking to somebody within finance, well, the talks are kind of concerned with dollars and cents. Guests in fields of science generally produce scientific based discussions. Now, of course, I acknowledge that this is a generalization and not entirely true, but broadly speaking, I think there is something to this. However, my little theory was recently blown to shreds by way of this fascinating conversation with an industrial designer. Somebody who designs a product from scratch intended for mass production. And he was presenting his profession in a way that kind of showed me just how eclectic that line of work truly is. It kind of encompasses a bit of everything from arts, science, business, culture, and so much more. And the talk was really quite compelling and will definitely appeal to those interested in those areas: arts, design, engineering, and even manufacturing. We do kind of get into some 3D printing talk. However, even for those who are outside of those topical areas of interest, we'll still really get a lot of this talk. So let me more formally introduce you to our guest, and we can launch into it all. Ray Horacek is one of the co-founders and the creative forces behind Anomaly, an award-winning industry-disrupting product design firm. With an education in fine arts and industrial design from the Rhode Island School of Design and Strat College in Paris, France, he has leveraged that knowledge and skill across his career into becoming an award-winning creative director and industrial designer specializing in athletic innovation and wearable technology. Now, Ray has a history of creating category-defining breakthrough products and is named on various unique patents. And his work has seen him consistently create high-caliber products internally at places like Reebok and Puma. Further, he's been part of successful global product launches for corporate clients and crowdfunding campaigns for startups. Passionate about the intersection of technology, nature, and art, his work reflects much of these constructs. And the representation of these ideals, coupled with his own unique lateral thinking abilities, and of course his artistic talent in the development of original insights and the delivery of unexpected designs, has allowed him to garner much in the way of respect and award across his career. And finally, Ray is active as a design professor and is also involved in the mentoring of startups. And with all that stated, here's my conversation with Ray Horacek. Yeah, how are you doing?
Good. Great to be here, Christopher.
Yeah, I'm really excited for this conversation. Digging into all of your work and what you're up to, I think we're primed for an interesting discussion. So, with that in mind, why don't we just dive right into it? I do have the first segment lined up. It's something called Coloring Wikipedia. And as my listeners would know, it's basically a segment where I just read off a definition of what the guest does, sometimes their industry. And I do it for a couple of reasons. One, I think it brings everybody up to speed, especially if it's, a profession or an industry that people have a limited idea or understanding of. I think it's helpful in that sense. And also, two, sometimes I think that based on the geographic region or maybe culture as well, the job title can vary from person to person, from region to region. So that twist unto itself as well, I think, makes it an interesting starting point. And I have you down here for industrial design. So for the sake of the conversation, I know you're involved in creative directing as well, but maybe we could just go into industrial design if that's all right.
Yeah, sounds good. Sure.
All right, well, here we go. Industrial design, as defined by Wikipedia. Industrial design is a process of design applied to physical products that are being manufactured by mass production. It is the creative act of determining and defining a product's form and features, which takes place in advance of the manufacture or production of the product. It can emphasize intuitive creativity or calculated scientific decision-making, and often emphasizes a mix of both. Industrial design, as an applied art, most often focuses on a combination of aesthetics and user-focused considerations, but also often provides solutions for problems of form, function, physical ergonomics, marketing, brand development, sustainability, and sales. A bit of a mouthful. I did get through it without stumbling.
Yeah.
But first take, what do you think of that though, Ray?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a reasonably accurate definition. I think the overall idea of being an industrial designer is really a matter of wearing a lot of hats, balance a lot of different areas, and kind of working in a world of contrast, let's say. So I think the first thing is, at the core, you're basically something between an artist, like a fine artist, an engineer, like let's say a sociologist, or like a kind of behavioral psychologist, maybe. So you're kind of, you need to know how humans work, you need to know how objects work, and you need to know kind of the whole world of, aesthetics and kind of desirability and that kind of stuff. So from the base of it, for sure, you go to art school to study industrial design. You can go to a technical school as well. Usually industrial designers have more of an art bent, or kind of a technical bent, or some of them for sure kind of the more social, kind of sociologist type of approach. But it really is a combination of those three. It's also kind of, what's interesting about that definition too is they kind of list it as a list. It's kind of, includes this and includes that. I kind of see it a little bit like all those things sitting in contrast to one another. So I kind of think of it as like a giant spinning plate, where you're kind of sitting at the center, and all these things are spinning around kind of in balance, with the kind of extremes on both sides that are keeping everything in balance. So you have, things like you need to balance the historical kind of where we came from, what the background is of what you're working on, but then with futuristic technology, you have to balance kind of the artistic aesthetic approach, with kind of the manufacturability. The what I think was mentioned there about creativity, and scientific approach, which is kind of one way of thinking of it. Yeah, so one way is about being very expansive, and one way is about being very kind of focused on coming up with solutions. Next to that, you also have kind of an emotional versus logical thing, which is very important too. So the human element is extremely emotional, but then you also need to have an understanding element of the whole thing. And each of these is a whole kind of conversation in itself. You have things like being valuable versus being feeling valuable versus being affordable, right? So you need to make something, that people can afford to buy, but then so it needs to be manufactured relatively cheaply, but then it also needs to feel as valuable as possible. So that kind of getting that balance right. There's physical and digital, there's sustainable and, versus sustainability versus manufacturability. I think one of the contrasts that I think is most interesting is like this idea of being advanced yet acceptable. And so that was kind of first made popular by I think it was Raymond Loewy, the kind of the father of industrial design. This idea of Maya, MAYA, most advanced yet acceptable, and it's kind of this nice contrast, this balance where you're just catching that point where it snaps between something that's really futuristic and really challenging to people, but then still really, kind of catching the mass market of people.
I like that the way you broke it down for a lot of different reasons. I like that point of contrast. Like that's really interesting, and that's something that you said within this definition, which is quite sterile and quite cold, doesn't really sort of encapsulate that necessarily. And also, too, I think what I was taking away from that when you were describing it all is just I felt like if I were, or if anyone's in that profession, at least initially, it just feels like potentially you're getting pulled in all of these different directions constantly. At least your mind is. And I would imagine, at least initially, that must be a bit of a challenge to kind of deal with. Like maybe there's processes, and we're going to get into that perhaps later, of how you can kind of work through some of these ideas and whatnot. But just sort of struck me as like that would be a major challenge. And then there's one more point too that I thought was interesting was, at least stereotypically speaking, oftentimes I think people sort of have this division, say, like, oh, this person's involved in arts and this is the type of work that they do, or this is the line of thinking that they go down. Okay, this person's in sciences. It's a little bit different in that sense, what their interests are, how they think. But this type of job is a blending of those two worlds plus several others, which I found really quite compelling unto itself as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think one of the important things is that you need to keep your mind a bit plastic. And to do that, I think you need to build your mind in a plastic way. And to do that, I don't know of any way to get there besides going to art school, to be honest with you. Basically just stretching your brain in every direction as much as possible and kind of going back and forth between contrasts. Like it's like if you're in a room, with like 16 different walls around and whatever shape, you want to just keep pushing each wall out as far as possible at the beginning, and then the walls will slowly, as you get older, the walls will slowly start to kind of pull back in on you, and so you have to kind of keep pushing them or punching them back out. I think part of it is also really about just being curious. I think some people are built for this type of job, and some people are built for other types of jobs. I happen to be somebody who's quite curious, and I'm constantly just having to keep myself focused on the task at hand, or whatever's going on. I kind of have finally been able to figure out my monkey brain and how to kind of keep that, scratch that itch when it comes up, and I give myself 2 minutes at a time to, if there's something in my head I need to go figure it out and
Right.
find it on Wikipedia or something. Okay, cool. Now back to work.
Yeah.
Whatever
Yeah.
it is. I think, but that kind of natural curiosity, I think it can be, I don't know if it can be taught. It can be nurtured. That's a very, very important part of it. And for me, like my curiosity luckily happens to go between, fine arts and science. I kind of have a much too deep of an obsession with certain things into like origami. Actually, origami is the reason why I came into Japan in the first place.
Hmm.
It just I think just getting obsessed with different things and going down rabbit holes, because those rabbit holes eventually someday somewhere will end up being useful in a project. So
Right.
just kind of I'm kind of known within my family for knowing way too many random things, and it turns out that there's a use for
Well, it sounds like yeah, it sounds like it's serving you well, though, at least within this line of work. That's for certain. Maybe we could shift on to do another question here. Actually, it might be an impossible one at that. But in terms of the work that you do, and I'm sure this varies project to project, but I mean, what would be like in a simplistic sense, a day in the life of an industrial designer? What would take your time from, you know, morning to evening, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, so being a very visual person, my schedule, you might imagine, is a bunch of blocks of bright colors. And so I kind of go through each day and I plan out my coming day and sometimes my coming week, or even more, kind of with blocks of colors, kind of defining what I'm planning on doing each day. And of course, that includes meetings that are planned and stuff like that, deadlines for certain projects. And as I go through each day, then I kind of adjust it and kind of see how I did basically. And having it that kind of visual for me is really motivating, because basically I want to focus my time as much as I can on the creative design work, and as little as possible on emails and meetings and kind of other administrative stuff that is not contributing to make a better, more interesting, more desirable product. So yeah, basically it's just a day does include a whole bunch of administrative things like emails and meetings and all that kind of stuff, but you just try to just pack that into small chunks as much as possible. And then the rest of my day is very much connected around kind of a lot of drawing, which is both by hand and kind of on the computer on the Cintiq. A lot of kind of imagery. So basically, getting your engine going, getting your creative engine going with kind of a whole bunch of visuals at the beginning of a project, at the beginning of a day, as you're starting a sketching session, stuff like that. And that's super important. There's a lot of Adobe kind of suite stuff, a lot of Photoshop and Illustrator, sometimes InDesign. Then these days I'm doing a lot of 3D work. So there's a lot of kind of Rhino and kind of rendering software and stuff like that. I'm doing computational design and kind of dabbling and getting deeper into some of those things. So yeah, it's kind of a lot of different areas trying to focus on the creative side.
Yeah, sorry. To what degree would you say like a day like that would be structured versus a little bit more loosely orientated? I mean, you'd already mentioned, of course. I mean, you try to structure it in the sense of, right, get the administrative stuff off to the side. Okay, that's important. It has to be done. But then you want to make sure that you have enough time to be focusing on these things that you were just explaining.
Yep.
But I was kind of struck by what you're saying there of it sounds like you're trying to gain inspiration perhaps for these particular projects, by viewing certain imagery or doing different types of tasks to kind of get you in that frame of mind, which is going to ultimately hopefully bring out the best of your abilities and the way you work. But I was curious, as I was listening to that, like, to what degree is that process structured versus it being sort of just like your mind was going off this way? Okay, you're going to go off this way. And if that's going to take an hour, that's going to take 30 minutes, it's going to take 45 minutes, so be it. Like,
Yeah,
I'm just curious about that point. I don't know if we can hear a little bit more
sure.
about that, or if you understand where I'm going with
Yeah,
it.
absolutely. And it's interesting because I do fine art as well. That's the main thing I do outside of my job. I think the difference between art and design is something that I think about a lot, and talk to people a lot, and kind of listen to a lot of things. There's a lot of different ways of thinking about it, but generally art is more of a kind of an exploration. It's more of kind of you don't have a specific goal, and you're kind of going off into an unknown space, like a dark room that's never been lit before, and you're trying to find, you're trying to build the room, let's say, that no one's ever built before. And I think design is a little bit more of a problem solving based situation. So you're using a lot of the same tools, but the purpose is not to discover a new room that's never been discovered before. The purpose is really to solve a specific problem or a set of specific problems for customers, consumers. And so there is, it's like, let's say it's like uh, boundless creativity inside a very specific box, if that makes sense. Whereas art approach is just endless, open, right? This is just
Yeah, I think that's
structured.
what I was trying to get at, but I just couldn't articulate it as well. But it's that I was thinking there must be like there has to be some degree of confines, boundaries for what you're trying to do. Otherwise, you could just lose yourself in a project. Of course, there's deadlines, and you have to get things in for clients and
Yeah.
everything else. But yeah, I think that answers it. Yeah.
And then the one thing I add to that too is that, I think it's been said that a professional is not someone who can do really high level work once or twice. It's someone who can do really high level work on a regular basis over and over again, no matter what the situation is. And having a system, like a structure to your kind of day, your week, your projects, how you handle things, I think allows, a creative and curious person to be able to you know, be able to produce in that kind of a way.
Maybe yeah, we could take this opportunity to shift into a new segment here, actually, Ray. Something called Pathways, and basically it's a segment where I just kind of dive into the guest's history a little bit, their backstory, if you will. And for listeners who don't know, Ray is based within Japan, within Tokyo or Yokohama. Is it Yokohama?
Yokohama these days, yep.
And yeah, I'd be curious about what brought you to Japan. You'd already lightly mentioned a little bit about your interest, in Japan early on, but then also to like what led you to forming the company that you're running right now, Anomaly.
Yeah, sure. So let's see. So I went to school first in the US in Rhode Island, to the Rhode Island School of Design, did some studying in a school in Paris, Clat College. That was for industrial design. In college, it was a mix of fine arts and industrial design. I came right out of school into Reebok. There was kind of a sign on the elevator, anybody who wants to get your portfolio reviewed by Reebok. I was like, yeah, sure, whatever, sounds good.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah.
one thing led to the next, and then I was a footwear designer. That very quickly brought me to Tokyo. They had a design studio over here in Daikanyama, and I was just fresh out of school, and they were like, "When can you go?" I was like, "Tomorrow." Sure. And I was like on a plane and like never came back. So that was really exciting. It was actually a dream of mine to always kind of visit or maybe potentially live in Japan. I always kind of had a super strong interest in Japan, Japanese culture. So that really was really lucky for me. I was at Reebok for a couple of years over here, but I was mainly working with the international kind of team there. Then I kind of shifted over to Puma, also within Japan, in the same deal, kind of working, for the international, kind of back and forth between the international and the Japan team. Kind of, did a bunch of really cool stuff, really cool projects. Again, back and forth between the two. Then eventually kind of moved into the innovation team in Puma. And so then since then, I've been kind of working with the innovation team. And now at one point, I left the company and became an external freelancer. And at the same time, started a design firm with my brother, who's a mechanical designer, mechanical engineer. And so then we kind of are doing that in parallel to kind of me still doing work with the Puma innovation team. And we have kind of been focusing mainly on wearable technology, connected hardware, IoT, Internet of Things. And we're also kind of getting into the world of additive manufacturing now. We're kind of having a startup actually around that.
What led you to going off on your own a little bit like that with your brother and starting this company? Like, was it just something just wanting more direction yourself in terms of or more control over some of the projects or some of the things that you'd like to be working on? Was it just a drive that way, or was it just like seen as a challenge? Well, or well, maybe it was client driven, perhaps even people approaching you.
Yeah, maybe all of the above. I think the main thing I would say was I tend to get really into things, and so at some point I think putting so much of yourself into something that in the end is kind of a day job that you kind of get the same amount of recognition for, no matter what. It got to be frustrating sometimes. Having said that, I still really enjoyed it. But after having done something for so many years, I think you kind of look for what's the next step. And I think I kind of wanted to build something on my own that I could kind of do what I wanted as I liked with it. At the same time, very luckily, my brother was also kind of in a similar position, and so we used to kind of just chat about ideas back and forth. Ever since we were little, we used to kind of make stuff together or whatever, and we were kind of always giving each other advice about things and all this kind of stuff, and it was just this random almost thing. Like one day we'd happen to be sitting in a cafe at the top of this huge massive building in Bucharest in Romania, and we were just sitting there and we just looked at each other and we were like, wait a second, should we do this together?
Yeah, exactly, right.
And we both were working in the world of product, me in design and him in engineering, and it was like these we started at the same place, we went really, really different directions, and like the stars just pulled us back very aggressively together, I guess.
Yeah. It's really cool though. Really cool for sure. And maybe this is a good opportunity to let the cat out of the bag as well. I mean, here on Life Has, we're going to be actually speaking with Ray's brother, Rob, in a future episode from the mechanical engineering perspective of this work. And as Ray's already insinuated, I mean, these two worlds do come together and work in unison to actually, create these products that a lot of us love and, have interest in. So yeah, might be a good opportunity to move on over into another segment of Q&A discovery. We can just kind of continue this back and forth. And this first question here, I thought it might be a nice opportunity to, while we're on the topic of learning a little bit more about your company in terms of the types of products and services that you do offer and what you're involved in, and even maybe a brief overview of some of the projects and types of clients that you have.
Yeah, sure. So I guess just as a general overview of kind of what we do, the processes we go through. So as mentioned a minute ago, so Rob and I kind of run this together, and so you have kind of the two polar opposites, but in some ways still exactly the same type of thinking. And what we do is we focus on the seamless integration of those two disciplines. So the industrial design, the kind of human factors, the aesthetics, with the mechanical, kind of all the engineering, kind of mechanical design stuff, connection with the factories and molding and all that kind of stuff. One of the reasons why we focus so much on that, I mean, naturally, he and I as brothers work really well together, but both he and I had experienced such frustration in the past when you're working on creating products. There's this thing where people like there's like a wall, and the designer will throw it over a wall to the engineer, and then the engineer eventually will throw it over the wall of the factory. And there's such disconnect that happens in those areas. You can make the best design, you can draw something super beautifully and whatever, have the nicest material, color, concept, and everything. But if that wall is there, it doesn't really matter.
Something's lost.
Yeah, it won't become reality. So that's really one of the focuses for us, is just to make sure that it's just a perfect blend. And I even, have gotten a lot more into the 3D side, closer into the engineering side. When you talk to him, you'll find out he very much can go into the design, kind of lateral thinking side. So that's kind of our main, kind of focus. That basically the overall process that involves, it starts with kind of looking at framing the problem, the design context, the creative direction, then which kind of is involved gathering inspiration and kind of understanding the consumer, the product landscape, where this product will live. There's a lot of things about ergonomic exploration with consumers, how people's bodies interact with products, how their eyes, their ears as well. Then it goes into kind of sketching and my divergent exploration, and then refining that down, getting into 3D modeling and rendering, and then you get into the manufacturing kind of element of the whole process. And Rob kind of is a lot more on that side, kind of getting involved with the factories and suppliers and materials and all that, prototyping, all that kind of fun stuff. So
in terms of, I guess, the type of products that you're working on, I mean, oftentimes it's wearable technologies, correct me if I'm wrong, and that's the basis of a lot of the products, right, that you're offering. And also too, I understand that like the types of people that have been utilizing this wearable technology, a lot of athletes. Maybe you could bring listeners up to speed a little bit on that as well, just to kind of paint this picture even a little bit more clearly.
Sure. Yeah. So actually, I mean, let's call wearable technology a big enough category to include footwear, because that is the background that I came out of, and also for Rob, kind of where he came from. So, but we've had some really kind of good luck with that. So on the kind of sports side, so Usain Bolt was wearing a whole range of different shoes that I had kind of worked on. Andre DeGrasse, Andre DeGrasse is another Olympic sprinter. I think he got the bronze. No, he got the silver. No, he got the gold in something that I had designed in Tokyo Olympics, and he got the bronze along with Usain Bolt in the Olympics before that.
Wow.
So Ricky Fowler is a professional golfer. Johnny Damon, professional baseball player. A whole bunch of other kind of golfers as well. And on the lifestyle side, actually, Michelle Obama was kind of photographed wearing a few of my shoes, kind of in the beginning of the Obama presidency. Rhianna, the singer, has worn some of my shoes. A whole bunch of others.
Yeah. I mean, the website was it was pretty interesting to see all of that. I mean, it's pretty cool. It must be pretty cool. A bit of a thrill, obviously, to for anyone. I think in any line of work, I think it's human nature. You want a degree of respect for the work that you do, and it's nice. I mean, it certainly helps, but not that it means that you get that from these individuals only, but all the same, I mean, the culture that we live within, sometimes these sort of things do sort of add a little bit of a boost, right or wrong, I guess you could say. So yeah, it must be pretty interesting for you in that sense, a sense of accomplishment at times seeing this. I mean, obviously the standards are quite high for some of these individuals and whatnot, and especially when it comes to some of these athletes who are actually maybe utilizing the products for training to help them in their overall success. I mean, that ultimately has got to be a major, thrill or boost or whatever, word you want to attach to that. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's I think it's important too, on top of that, if you can solve problems for the most extreme users of any situation, then the normal users will have no problem. If I solve for me to run on a track, it's not going to help anybody, I promise you. But if I solve something that Usain Bolt then can use, then nobody else is going to really have any trouble with it. So that's
Exactly.
one of the other reasons for working or having the ability to work with kind of top level athletes and stuff like that.
So is that, correct me if I'm wrong, is that a strategic sort of approach within the company?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of those happened, kind of as part of Puma. That's kind of its own, kind of monster that is, promoting those athletes and working with those athletes anyways. When Rob and I are working on our kind of projects, aside from that, we use the same approach wherever possible. Obviously, I can't just call up any world-class athlete and just by the way, but you are able to build connections and kind of get things lined up for that as well. And so this startup that we're working on, the additive manufacturing startup, so the first project is it's called Lore. It's a cycling shoe, a very, very new approach to cycling shoes. So we're kind of currently, I'm not going to mention who yet, but we're currently working with some of the top triathletes and cyclists actually in the world. As long as you're able to get those connections, then it's definitely the best approach.
In terms of, I guess, returning to this point, you've kind of lightly touched upon it, or we lightly spoke about it, in this notion of inspiration, I guess, kind of fueling yourself, your creative expression. Oftentimes, like, well, even off the top, I mentioned, like, part of what you do is this blend of technology, of nature, art. A lot of these influences come into your work. And yeah, I'd be curious about how you go about keeping each individual silo, technology, nature, and art, brimming with this passion from within, and where you're sourcing these ideas from.
Yep.
I do understand that you have a separate website off on the side in terms of some of your artistic expression, whether it be sculpting, whether it be other forms of artistry, painting, 3D, digital design, different things. But I'd be curious to hear it from you. I mean, how do you keep yourself centered in that sense?
Yeah, I think it's really kind of back to the curiosity thing. I think luckily I do have a natural curiosity that's kind of insatiable. So sometimes it's almost the opposite problem. Like, how do I focus on getting what needs to be done as opposed to getting distracted and being inspired by things? So that's kind of a good problem to have, but it's also not not so easy to kind of battle with that back and forth. Having said that, it's not an automatic thing all the time, and so you do have to kind of recharge your creative engine. As you mentioned, things, whether it's art or nature or technology. So on the art side, I mean, just being kind of luckily I'm practicing fine artist, so I do art shows. I am in an artist residency program. I do figure drawing all the time, all that kind of stuff. I go to art museums and art galleries, constantly talking to artists and, kind of other creative people, just to kind of keep that all that, energy and, information up to date. With the technology side, I just try to, every time there's a new technology that's anywhere near what I'm working on, I just try to gobble up as much information about it as possible. If it's software, I try to get in touch with it and try it out and just see how it might be something I can play with. For me, like technology, like software, futuristic 3D software, computational stuff like that, it's not any different than a pencil. I mean, a technology is technology, whether it was invented this year or 5,000 years ago. And kind of playing with technology is kind of one of the things that I like to do. So just being involved and touching technology, and the same with nature. Just being out in the mountains, skiing and snowboarding, or going to the islands, or my studio is right on a river, right with the cherry blossoms, whatever it is. It's just being in touch, in physical touch, and just not being on the internet, kind of searching for pictures all day.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it strikes me as like lifestyle choices. A lot of this work is highly tied into that. I mean, some professions you could probably disconnect and you can have a completely separate life unto itself. Maybe you're working within business development within a big company, and then you go off and you do your own things, and there's these separate worlds that don't really matter between each other, in terms of the influences and whatnot. But it strikes me as that your profession almost demands that of someone who's going to be successful within it. I mean, fortunately for you, you've mentioned a couple times over, you have this innate sense of curiosity, which kind of pulls you in all these different directions and pulls you into these different realms that ultimately seemingly would supply you with all this, passion and, information and ideas to let that flow into your work as well. But again, it would seem that your line of work in particular would almost demand this. Does that make sense, or does that?
Yeah, I would say that's pretty accurate. Again, some other people in the industry may say something slightly different. I would guess that the people that are the strongest designers are the ones who are the most passionate about it, and the ones who are the most passionate about it are the ones who, wake up in the morning and the first thing they think about is things and people, and how to change people's lives, and how to how cool something looks, or things like that, and you just spend your life like that. I mean, when I met my wife, one of the first things I told her was that, I'm just so I'm not going to retire. Retiring would be like, like, what are you going to retire from? If I retired, I'm just going to be doing the same thing and not getting paid for it. It's just
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, it's just
Well said.
it's pretty simple.
Yeah. 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 That blending of passion and work, it really, it's a fine line, or it doesn't even exist. I mean, that line, it is bringing both of those worlds together. Okay.
People define work in different ways. For me, I finally came up with the definition of work. It's something that you're getting paid to do something that you wouldn't do otherwise. And in that way, I like to say that I don't work so much. I get paid, but I would be doing the same thing otherwise.
Yeah.
So,
It's interesting you bring this up because I just had a guest on. Well, I just recorded with him last week, and he's a founder of a tech company, an interactive media company based out of Ontario, Canada, and they've highly decorated. He's won a couple of Emmys for his work, and their work spans a few different genres, whether it's like radio, whether it's television, whether it's VR, blending real world as well, a lot of different things. And he said he's been in the business for about 20 years now, I think, and he had one patch where he was questioning himself, like maybe it was a bit of a rough patch there 10 years ago, and he thought, well, am I doing the right thing? Am I still in it for the right reasons? What am I doing here? And he forced himself to sort of imagine taking himself out of this world, like what would he be doing? And then as he sort of lost himself in his thought, a lot of his ideas were just tracking back to what he's doing right now, which kind of, brings us back to what you were just sharing there too. I think this is a true definition of, passion and finding it and knowing that you have it is that like, it's a useful little exercise, I thought, to really kind of discover who you are and what you're all about. And it perfectly illustrates it, between what you've just shared and what that previous guest said. So
yeah.
yeah. All right. Well, I do want to shift over into another question here. And this is a bit on the business side, I suppose. And I mentioned this off the top when I was introducing you, that your company has also been quite active as far as 9 crowdfunding launches, all of which were successful and 5 for over $200,000. Maybe you could shed some light a little bit on that side of the work that you do and your involvement in projects such as those.
Yeah, those are obviously working with startups. We do a lot of work with startups. We do mentoring for startups. We've kind of been involved with kind of startup accelerators. This is for a number of reasons. So one is that the world is shifting and the world is becoming a very startup heavy world. Young people these days are much more likely to either be in a startup or want to be in a startup than to say, hey, I want to be working for a big corporation for my whole life. Another thing is that the startups are very much on the edge of everything. So they are on the cutting edge of technology thinking. I mean, these are usually people that have come right out of college, right? So it's kind of, there's just so many ideas and so much knowledge that it's so further ahead and so much faster and more raw than kind of what we've experienced in kind of the corporations in our kind of past. It also, because they are younger people, because the projects are usually a little bit more kind of world changing, game changing. That's kind of something that I really like to do, to kind of be involved with. Like I don't want to spend all my life, every one of my days on making the next version of something that exists. I would much rather kind of focus on changing an industry, disrupting an industry, creating a new industry that wasn't there beforehand, stuff like that. So that's kind of why we kind of really like to work with startups, and it gives us a lot of energy as well. So just the crowdfunding is it's a great new mechanism that wasn't there 20 years ago or whatever, that allows people that don't have the kind of corporate or, let's say, bank backing to still be able to create something and use the power of the internet to fund it from, and then bring it to and sell it to people all around the world. So it's really a really exciting space.
Yeah, definitely. I can see that. And again, like in the context of this conversation, I can see how it would feed right into, the cycle of what you guys are working on consistently of, again, being exposed to new ways of thinking, new ideas, and getting inspiration from that, which ultimately probably feeds back into the work that you do, for some of the other projects that you're directly working on for your clients. So, yeah, which kind of leads me into my last question of this segment, really. I mean, ultimately, and I think I got a beat on where this could go, how you might answer this, but I still like to ask it anyway. It's like this line of work, ultimately, to what degree of satisfaction are you getting from all of this? I mean, certainly the way you've spoken about it already, it seems like it's a lifestyle thing. It's part of who you are. It defines who you are. But maybe you could share a little bit more about that. I mean, how deeply does it affect you in terms of, your views on it all.
Yeah, you mean like kind of bigger picture, kind of.
Yeah, bigger picture. I mean, even philosophically speaking, I mean,
Yeah.
what does this work mean to you? The work that you're doing outside of, say, maybe the business side of it, and generating income and keeping the business afloat and all of that. I mean,
Yeah.
like on a more personal level.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think there is a certain element of kind of helping people. Some of the projects that I've been the most proud of are the ones that are either, for children. We did a wearable for children that kind of tracks their health and lets their parents know that they're okay and kind of where they are, to a certain degree. We've done some projects like health related for elderly, kind of a fall device for elderly, and kind of a blood pressure tracker. Those kind of projects. We did a project for epilepsy sufferers. Like those kind of projects I think have some of the stronger meaning than your kind of usual, help somebody run faster, which is also valuable, but it's a little bit less world changing. We've also worked on some projects that save lives as well. So helmets, like climbing helmets and stuff like that, have actually saved lives. And we've gotten emails like with pictures of helmets that are cracked open, and the person was like, "Yeah, I walked away, I was fine." Like that. I mean, that's saved someone's life. That's pretty amazing kind of thing to think about. And then the last thing I guess I would say would be, just the idea. I've done a lot of footwear, and one of the things that I've always liked about footwear is that, we are all on this earth. Everything about us has always been on this planet. We've evolved on this planet, whatever. Like us as beings, individual beings, are, no matter what, our home is this planet, and you are connected to this planet through your feet because of gravity, and anyone who's not walking around barefoot is connected to this planet through your footwear. And so for me, footwear has always been it's just a very deeply meaningful thing for people, for that reason, but also, no matter what country you go to, what economic level people are, how difficult things get. Again, there are people that in the world that are barefoot, and their feet evolve to be, or they not evolve, but they kind of develop to not need shoes and sandals or whatever at some point. But the vast majority of us do wear shoes, and even if there's a recession or depression or whatever, people still buy shoes and need shoes. It's just a very, very necessary thing.
Well, it sounds like there's certainly several different levels of satisfaction that you can kind of derive from it, and yeah, I could see, again, not just from your answer within this question, but I think throughout this whole conversation thus far, I can see how it would be deeply, moving for you, and, deeply fulfilling. Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that. Maybe we could shift on into this other segment here, a middle segment, a water cooler story segment. And here I just ask, guests to indulge listeners with a story related to their profession. And I'd love to hear what you have for us today.
I guess, just thinking about kind of what gives me the most, or like different feelings, and about the profession and kind of my work and what I've done. I think the thing that gives me the most excitement is when I see things that I've worked on very, very intently, and in very, very tiny detail. Every millimeter of everything, we've been through, we've kind of adjusted, negotiated, kind of shifted. If it's in like a smartwatch, you're kind of, moving things around, by 0.1, 0.2 millimeters. You've gone through like, could be 3, could be 6, could be 10 rounds of samples. You've adjusted, you've moved lines, you've changed textures, you've changed, the leather, you've changed like the construction of something, you've tried it on yourself, you've tried it on other people. Having gone through so much, what's really interesting about this kind of mass production that we're designing for is that it's something that I know so intently and so personally, that then gets, let's say, multiplied and copied and spread across the world to every country you can imagine, and that those people then can be experiencing the same product, but in a completely different way. Some people will look at it at that same level of like, oh my God, look at this, 0.3 millimeters. For sure, there's people that they take it apart and they kind of look at it at that level. Some people will just look at it like, yeah, this is really cool, I like it, it just looks cool. Some people will be like, this is the best fitting thing I've ever felt. Some people will perform better from it. Some people will be able to do new things, with like we've done like smartwatches. My favorite one we did was for musicians. And for that one, like it really helps them to learn their craft better and perform better and practice better, like all that kind of stuff. Just this idea of something that's so personal yet so universal. It's just so exciting to me. And when I see things on shelves, if I see it on athletes, if I see it on, just normal users on Instagram or whatever, just it's just really, really exciting and fun for me.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I mean, that's not a perspective I've really heard before, I guess. I mean, off the top, when I was introducing you, I was kind of lightly sort of touching on topics such as that, but I didn't certainly go into it at that level of depth. And it's really, really quite interesting. I mean, socially as well, culturally, all these different things, how the meaning of one particular product can go in so many different directions. Yeah, yeah, I like that. And I guess as a designer or someone who's so intimately involved in the creation of something like that, to see that sort of result, or to, even for you maybe at times being surprised by how it's being interpreted or how it's being used, even perhaps taking on a different life of its own, it must be really interesting and quite compelling to see all these things unfold, how people take ownership of these products in different ways. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where it gets into culture as well, because, I mean, culture is really a collection of what all these different people have kind of added to it, and it kind of develops itself as its own kind of mechanism. And to be kind of part of creating culture, like, some, like 1,000 years from now, if people look back until this time, they're not gonna, they're not gonna be looking at us, they'll see photographs and stuff, but they still will be able to have this product that was made at that time. They'll have the architecture that was made at that time, stuff like that. So
Yeah, yeah, no doubt. Well, maybe we could slide into this last segment here, Ray, something called a crystal ball segment. And as the name implies, we're looking towards the future, trends, predictions, so on and so forth. And I'd be curious to hear a little bit, about the evolution of your work, perhaps, from a technological perspective. Certainly, there's been a lot in terms of 3D printing that, came out several years ago. And at that time, oh, this is going to revolutionize everything. And probably in some ways it has. But also, right now, we're on the precipice of AI and everything that's going on with that. I mean, that's certainly a topic of conversation. But I'd love to hear your perspective on things when it comes to technology and your profession and how it's evolving, how it's moving forward.
yeah, I mean, one thing that I'll mention just in general, and I heard this somewhere, that today's luxury is tomorrow's commodity. Very much applies to kind of the profession that I'm in. Basically, our job, or what we aim to do, is to create luxury, meaning like a higher level or a more advanced level of anything that you have in your life. And as a product designer, you're touching really everything that a person would be touching in their everyday life. And the iPhone, for example, was something that when it came out, it was like, what the heck is that? Like, people just blew people's minds. But how many people do you know now that don't have a smartphone? It's a commodity. This is kind of the general cycle of things. And the same thing goes with as I was talking about footwear, the different technologies in footwear, like the normal, like, cheapest sneaker you can buy today, you know 40 years ago was the peak of technology. So I think it's just this constant, it's like you're constantly going up a hill that's constantly just sinking. So we're always in the same place, but it's just we're always climbing and it's always getting better. Is are people's lives always getting better is a different question, because that's a kind of a different set of things. But in terms of the technology, as you were just mentioning, kind of where we are currently, and kind of where we're going, as you say, 3D printing, additive manufacturing, is a really big deal. It's been talked about for a long time. It's kind of slower to come than people were kind of planning on. But as we talked about earlier, I mean, we're now part of a startup that is focusing completely on additive manufacturing and kind of custom fit products based on scans for a person's foot. So this is, it's and we are making it right now. This is happening, and we're not the only ones, for sure. I mean, there's lots of other companies doing the same thing. There's a lot of other technologies, as you mentioned, AI. I mean, I've already been using AI as a tool in design. It's a very helpful tool. People are worried it's going to take over and replace jobs. Some jobs will be replaced, but it's also the same as when Photoshop came out, the same as when the camera came out. It's going to create a lot more opportunities than it is going to replace. And I think the people that embrace that or any other technology are the ones who will be in a better position. So I think we should just keep embracing every technological step. make the best thing, make the most considered, refined solution to a given problem with the technology at that time, and then move on and do it again 5 years from now and with a different technology.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's nice to point that out. I think it's that bigger perspective on it all, and yeah, certainly with both 3D printing and AI, perfect examples of that. Returning really quickly to the 3D printing, I think I was struck by this thought of when you said. I think initially when it came out, people had these expectations for it to like blow up the world overnight, and maybe it sounds like right now, like the capabilities were certainly there, but maybe the other technologies that were needed to leverage the 3D printing itself or that technology weren't fully developed. And maybe now it sounds like, at least within your startup, perhaps maybe things are catching up. I don't know if that's an accurate assessment or not, but
Yeah, I would say because we're talking about an industry, we're talking about manufacturing, we're talking about something that, the Industrial Revolution, the second Industrial Revolution. I mean, these are things that didn't happen in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years,
iterations, yeah.
generations. This is something it took forever. And the same thing, with any of the current technologies, AI is actually moving a bit quicker, but like anything physical, 3D printing, additive manufacturing, it's the whole industry. So it's not just the fact that we can make these objects out of a 3D printer. It comes down to the materials. And the materials, it's taken a long time to develop the materials to the point where they're not only buildable in that material, but then they're actually usable over a long period of time. They're not going to break down. They're not going to turn yellow. That they're reasonably affordable. They can be done at scale, with the right machines or collections of machines, all that kind of stuff. So it's really the ecosystem around the technology, which is slower than the technology itself.
Yeah, that was a word I was reaching for, I think there. But yeah, really, really interesting stuff, and certainly with AI right now too, as well. The point that you raised of people getting a little bit uneasy with that, but I would tend to agree with you. I think as far as AI goes, if anything, like you said, it's going to create more opportunities, but beyond that, more possibilities, different types of jobs, perhaps of guiding AI along, or directing it towards this or towards that, or steering it this way or that way. I mean, it's going to create a series of different types of jobs. So there's certainly going to be opportunities there, no doubt. But I mean, within the context of this conversation, I can't believe we're approaching an hour already here, and it feels like we just got started. And there's so many more questions I would love to ask, but I am conscious of your time. And I've got to say, Ray, it's been an absolute pleasure. I really enjoyed this conversation, but maybe we can draw it to a close here.
I enjoyed it as well. Happy to talk to you and chat about something that I'm obviously very, very excited about and interested in.
Well, for those interested in learning more about Ray and his work or his company, Anomaly, you can check him out on LinkedIn or at his company website, anomaly.com. It's ANAMALY.com. Or, of course, on their socials, of which I'll have the links within the show notes. And also, too, if you like today's show, please be sure to share. It helps a ton. You can rate, review, and subscribe wherever you access your podcast. And head on over to YouTube. I do have a channel over there. You can check out video conversation. And finally, don't forget to tune in to the next episode of Life as A, where we'll continue to explore and unearth the details of professions and the people behind them. I'm your host, Christopher Schoenwald. Until next time, stay curious about life and living.